Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. My name's Sam. I'm one of the co-founders of ZenGate Global, where we're building the Palmyra ecosystem. And today I'm joined with a special guest and familiar face to many, Luca, who's our lead blockchain developer at ZenGate Global. Welcome, Luca.
Hi Sam, happy to be here.
Awesome. Just to kick things off, Luca, I'd love for you to just have a bit of time to introduce yourself to the community and to the listeners. You had a whole life before coming over to the ZenGate team, worked on all sorts of different projects, studied all sorts of different things adjacent and completely unrelated as well to blockchain. But please let us know a little bit about your background and how you got involved.
Oh yeah, sure. I graduated from university around 2 years ago. I studied physics and computer science at McGill in Montreal.
Mhm.
Um, my undergrad project was related to cryptography, and at the time I didn't understand the connection to like blockchains at all. I was aware of like Bitcoin and Ethereum, but I had never really like looked into it that deeply. And then about a year later, I saw the Charles Hoskinson interview with Lex Friedman, and as well as his TED Talk and his whiteboard video. And then I sort of got inspired by the potential of cryptocurrencies and how it could like help people in developing countries. Um, yeah, and that's when I sort of took a more serious interest in like working in the blockchain space. Uh, I started off since my background is in like physics and computer science, I was like interested in the research aspect of it. So I wasn't necessarily just looking at the top 10 like cryptocurrencies and then picking which one I was going to develop, like work on based on like market cap. I was really interested in like the science behind it. Um, so that's why I was that's what led me to Cardano and then eventually Ergo because Charles Hoskinson mentioned it in the interview with Lex Friedman. And then I had read the Ergo Manifesto written by Alexander Chipornoy, the founder of Ergo, and I found that even more inspiring. Um, yeah, and so I focused more on Ergo development and proof of work. And yeah, that's how I ended up here. And then I ended up meeting Dan and ended up getting an internship at ZenGate, and that's how I'm here now.
Awesome, yeah. And I also recall I think I amongst many other community members in on the Ergo side found our way through Cardano and through some of the stuff that Charles used to say. But for those that are listening, like Alex used to actually Alex was one of the co-founders of smartcontracts.com, which is now Chainlink, which is extremely relevant to some of the work that we do at ZenGate. But he spent a number of years working as a cryptographic researcher for input output as and developed a number of different papers. And if you actually look on the input output website, I think it's like IOHK/research. I was on it the other day since I was sharing some research to a associate professor I met in Tokyo, some of Alex's research, but all of the papers that he's co-authored is actually on that website still. So I don't know if Victor in the background can find it and link it. But yeah, for those that are interested in that, yeah, there's lots of stuff to read. But um, you have spent before we met, Luca. You spent a number of years developing on the Ergo blockchain, and the Ergo blockchain, like Cardano, is a UTXO based blockchain. And I'm just curious, like, what sort of stuff were you working on? Maybe you could let the guys and the people listening hear a little bit about some of the stuff that you've built and the tooling that you've built to contribute to sort of the development of Ergo and the adoption of Ergo.
Yeah, sure. So initially, when I got involved with Ergo, I joined they had just a group of people who were working on a zero interest loans project called Excel or Ergoland.
Mm,
They had started this project called DECO, which is like short for decentralized collaboration. Basically, like an online course, you'd meet up like once a week, and they would like go over UTXO concepts like Ergo script, which is like the smart contract language for Ergo, and just explain like concepts for Ergo development, like how to design protocols using the UTXO model and so on. So I joined that, and then after that, I actually got an internship at ErgoPad based on my how well I did in the DECO program, and that was my first like real foray into like professional development on Ergo. And then I also had my own side projects at the same time that I participated in ErgoHack. I don't remember if it was I think it was ErgoHack 3. It was called Guap Swap. So I partnered up with two miners who like knew more about mining than I did because I never was able to set up my own miner at the time. And it was basically a tool that would let miners once they get their payout from the mining pool, they could then just swap it directly on the Ergo DEX to get like a token that whatever token they wanted. So that was the version 1, and then version 2 is still in progress, which would let you just basically split up your payout so you get like multiple tokens, not just one. So you get like different percentages. And then after like about a year, I became like a TA at DECO, where I was helping teach the courses, and that's where I met another student at the time who joined the second cohort, Shishir, who's also my colleague at ZenGate. And we partnered up to create a NFT minting project called Lilium, which basically just lets people like they can upload metadata for their NFT collection, and then it would let them set up an NFT sale. And what was cool is it was like a minting on demand. So we don't have to pre-mint all the tokens ahead of time. They get minted at a time that the user wants to buy it. And we're able to do this because Ergo has this data structure called AVL trees. So we can store like all of the metadata in there and then just reference the ones we want whenever we mint the token at the time the user wants to buy it. And you can basically store like almost like practically unlimited data you want in there. So it's like really, really useful. Yeah, and then we've a bunch of other projects as well, like Fenix Finance for Hodl coin, and then as well as other things we're trying out, like Moria, which is supposed to be like a multi-sig management project. Yeah, and then as well as Gluon, which is a stablecoin protocol that I'm working on as well.
Yeah, so like, yeah, I still am baffled that you find the time to be able to work on all these projects on the side. And yeah, I was always quite impressed when I first came across GwapSwap. Funny story, I actually participated in the DECO cohort number 2, and I think I was taking the same course as Shishir at the time. I think I was in this like the UTXO smart contract sort of design class where we were learning a little bit about the input output model and how you design transactions, which has served me really well in terms of understanding what we need to do, obviously with the work with the Winter Protocol, which we'll go into later. But GwapSwap was so unique at the time that if you were a miner, you could, I guess the key value proposition at the time was around dealing with the tax systems as well, right? For many of the miners,
Right.
where
Yeah.
if you were to earn ERG from securing the Ergo network, and you wanted to hold it in a different currency, you would incur a taxation event. So the great thing around GwapSwap was it happened before it went into the miners' wallets as a reward or for securing the network. So that was really interesting. And one of the great things as well, which is extended off the back of that, which I think really emphasizes the unique value proposition for GwapSwap, is Rosen Bridge as well, right? So you know, one of the things we used to see, and I guess we still see, is people mining ERG. Back when the ROI of mining was a bit higher, they would just convert all of their tokens through an exchange into Bitcoin. But with the advent of Rosen being live, people can now mine ERG, hold RS-BTC, which is the wrapped token of Bitcoin, wrapped ADA, Hosky, like all sorts of stuff as well. So it really, I don't think enough people talk about it, but it's really crucial tooling in the ecosystem, which yeah, enables miners to be able to hold hold anything from algorithmic stable coins to reserve-backed stable coins like USDM to meme tokens to Bitcoin itself. So yeah, it's great that you got to work on that and found that project as well.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of like features that I'd like to add eventually once I get the time again to work on that. But yeah, like as you mentioned, the reason like we can avoid the taxation event is because yeah, when the miner receives their payout, traditionally it goes directly to their wallet address. But instead, the payout goes to what's like basically a smart contract. So instead of providing their actual like public key like wallet address to the mining pool, they'll provide the address of the smart contract, and the mining pool doesn't really like know the difference. It's just an address to them. So they'll send the payout to there, and then the program they run on their computer, the miner, the Guapstop program, then it'll just like create a transaction which does a swap with Ergo DEX.
Yeah, the other one
Yeah.
as well, Luca, that I really want to highlight, which I think is really unique, is what you guys have worked on with Fenix Finance. So for those listening, Luca, Shashir, and I think Alex as well was involved reviewing the contracts, right, or helped in the project. The guys developed something called Hodl Erg, and you'd have Hodl assets effectively. But yeah, Luca, why don't you take over and explain a little bit about what that is? Because the term that came out of it, which I really like, is a term called DeGenFi, and it's different to, I guess, the DeFi and so TradFi sort of path that I come from, and I think would really resonate with other communities as well. There's lots of different projects out there which I think would like this type of concept, especially on Cardano. But it's live on Alephium, right? And it's also live on Ergo right now. But yeah, why don't you jump in and let us
Oh
know a
yeah,
little bit about how it
sure.
works and what it is.
So the Hodl coin protocol, it was developed by a mathematician, Bruno, who worked on he was the original author of the JET paper. So he used to work at IOHK, and then he worked on the JET paper there. And then now he does like his own thing with Stability Nexus. And one of the things he worked on was the Hodl coin protocol, which is, as you mentioned, like a degen finance game. So at the time, like meme coins were a big thing, and I guess they kind of still are a bit on certain blockchains. But he wanted to make like a degen finance game that was like kind of safe in a way, so you could know all of the assumptions ahead of time, like before playing the game. And so the paper, like that's the point of the paper. It's like there's a proof that shows that based on how the game works, the price of the token like always goes up. It uses an induction proof to prove this. And so so basically you you have like a reserve, so like a bank, you put your ERG in it, your money, and then you get the token back called the Hodl token. And initially the price is like 1-to-1. And then as more people purchase the token, the price still remains 1-to-1, but then once someone starts selling their token back to redeem their ERG, they pay like a fee to the bank, and so the reserves in the bank increases over time once more people sell, and this causes the like price of the token to increase. So subsequent buyers will have to pay more to purchase a HODL token, but the people who sell afterwards receive more ERG if they sell after, like if they HODL the longest. So when they worked on their implementation, there was like a bug in the contract. So someone was able to like withdraw all the money, which is I think around 90K USD at the time. Yeah, so luckily the guy was a developer in the Ergo ecosystem. So he gave it back the money. They managed to give the money back. But that's where Shashir and I got involved. We sort of reviewed the contract, we fixed it, and we deployed it, and then made our own like UI. This is the Fenix Finance UI, where we use a proxy contract, whereas the like actual UI of the project uses you can just interact with the bank directly. Yeah, and so that's how I met Bruno. and I helped him derive some equations so you could know like your maximum return. So let's say a bunch of people before you bought the Hodl token, and then then you buy it, okay? And then imagine that everyone like before you just like sells all their tokens. So you're the last person left, and the price obviously, because everybody else before you is selling, the price goes up. So you want to know if you're the last person, uh, like how much like or would you get at the time if you're the last person to unhodl. So you can derive some equations for that, and then yeah, I think it was like almost around like 40%, which isn't bad, I guess.
Yeah, like for a game of attrition, that's quite fun, and yeah, it got a lot of traction on the Ergo side when you guys launched Phoenix Finance and on Alephium as well. And I think someone took the idea and put a catalyst proposal in and got funded. I think 6 months
Oh
back. I'm
yeah,
not sure if it's live yet. But yeah, it's a
I think
shame
it
that you
is.
guys
Yeah.
didn't get to build it out.
No, I think, well, I know Bruno still wants to do it on Cardano. Anyway, but what's cool about Hodl coin is like it's kind of like a primitive, so you can actually like use it in other protocols you want to create as like a kind of a, in a strange way, is like a funding mechanism. Um, but yeah, so that's also the cool part about it. Is like it's kind of like a primitive that you can use in other protocols.
And when you say primitive, you're not talking just about having HODL snack or HODL Hosky of all sorts of assets on chain. Are you talking about something else beyond that?
I mean, like, so I mean, kind of like how do I say this? Like, let's say I'm designing some new protocol. Like, you want to break up the components into like these modular components, and one of those pieces could be like a HODL coin. Uh, like one of the ways your protocol functions is because it has HODL coin in it. So you can use it as like a component of your like greater protocol as like a way, like depending on whatever you want to do, it's like a way to like get. You can use the fact that people want to be like degenerates with they want to basically get gamble kind of. So you can use that as a funding mechanism for whatever protocol you want to use. Like it's just like a cool part about it.
That's awesome. And when you guys were building, well, I guess the first question is like, do you have you heard of other projects working on stuff like this outside of the UTXO space, or is there something unique about the UTXO building environment that you could actually show the proofs in the way that you wanted it to?
Um, well, that's like the cool part is like on for whatever reason on Ergo and I guess Cardano in a way as well. Like there's all this cool like well I don't see this in any other ecosystem necessarily. Like I know there's other degen finance games on other blockchains, but when you try to read the documentation of the project, either it's like not there on the website, like you don't actually I don't understand how it works. Whereas with this, I can actually like go on the like I can like, read the paper. It's like only like it's only one page for in the case of a Hodl coin, which is also kind of funny because papers are usually like much longer than that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so the fact that it could fit on one page is also funny. But because like that's how I also met Bruno. He asked me to collaborate with him on the Gluon stablecoin protocol, and even other blockchains that or other projects that implement stablecoins. Like they also don't. Uh, I find it difficult to find like um, documentation on how it actually works and or proofs like mathematical proofs that show that it has certain like it maintains certain properties of like stability, which is the cool part about Jet and Gluon is like we have proofs that actually like you can prove certain desirable stability properties of the protocol, which is yeah, which I it's hard to find on other blockchains. Even like for the most like the biggest stable coins don't really have that.
Yeah, yeah, and obviously, yeah, some stable or many stable coins, especially the reserve-backed ones, it's very difficult to actually see like a proof of reserve of the underlying asset, right? So for those listening, like reserve-backed stable coins, if you have a US dollar peg, you're holding the reserves in a bank or in treasury bills, but it's very difficult to actually go and show that you're actually holding on to it. You're the owner of those funds that back that peg. And there's been issues in many cases, right, that we've seen I guess like the most recent one was the concerns around the depegging of USDC. I don't know if you remember, Luca, about a year and a half ago, we actually were holding some USDC, and I remember having a call with Dan about it. I was in Nara visiting the deers, which is the same place. If you're following Charles Hoskinson on Twitter, and he was patting some deers a few days ago, it was that city. So I was about an hour away from my computer at the time. It was a weekend, and I remember calling Dan after hearing about the Silicon Valley Bank collapse, and we were a bit concerned what's going on. And it's really difficult to be able to prove. Even at that point, I think USDC Circle had come out and said, "Hey, only 17% of our total reserves are in that bank," which doesn't help, right? Because it's or 10% or whatever. And I remember at the time it's overcorrected, right? So let's say they said it was 10%, it was trading at like 82 cents, and it obviously stabilized back up in the end. So there were no concerns, and Silicon Valley Bank got bailed out. But the great thing around algorithmic stablecoins obviously has a trade-off as well, but you can see where the reserves are at the end of the day. But I want to dive into that a little bit more in terms of the work you're doing with Gluon on the side over the last year or so. And for those listening, Bruno was the guy that came up with JED. And the first implementation of the algorithmic stablecoin was actually on Ergo, and IOHK was working with the Ergo Foundation and with Bruno to actually develop this. And it was called the Age USD protocol. And it's called SIG-USD on the Ergo blockchain. So Ergo actually had a stablecoin before Cardano did. I think before Cardano had smart contracts even. So it was the playground in terms of testing and working these kinks out, basically. And off the back of that, obviously, IO worked with Cody, and they developed JED, which is a very popular stablecoin on the Cardano side. But their model is very different to the model that Gluon's working on. And Luca, maybe you could go into a little bit more detail around how that works and why the UTXO components are so important for actually proving this out. But it's when I first read the paper, which I'm not sure is published yet, but I remember, Luca, you shared the draft versions with me. It had a very different spin to it. It was the first time I've ever read anything like that before, and I'll let you explain it in more detail. But yeah, just dive right into that.
Yeah, so all credit goes to Bruno. He's the one who come up with all these ideas. I'm just helping out on the paper, proving the theorems and some smart contract development. So JED basically has this thing called a reserve ratio, which is the ratio of the reserves to the liabilities. So it lets you mint and redeem stablecoins, but like within a range of the reserve ratio. So if the reserve ratio exceeds a certain amount or is like below a certain amount, then you can't do certain operations like minting more or redeeming. But these values are are arbitrary. Like when they launched the protocol, they just decided on certain values to put. So with Gluon, it removes this constraint where there's no you can always mint and redeem stablecoins. It doesn't prevent you from doing that. The only sort of caveat is that you pay a increasing fee to do so. So this just generates more revenue for the bank instead. The sort of philosophical idea behind Gluon is that instead of swapping purchasing a stablecoin with your ERG, you can think of what you're really doing is taking your ERG and splitting it into two sub assets, which we call the tokeons, sort of like a play on words with nucleon. So token plus nucleon equals tokeon. It's kind of like so nucleon is like the subatomic particles of an atom, like the protons and neutrons. So we can think of the stablecoin as a neutron, and the other token, which is a more volatile token, called the proton. Um, yeah, and then this comes with 4 operations. So you can do like a fission, which means it's like splitting your erg into 2 tokens, the proton and neutron. So, and then you can do a fusion, so feed back protons and neutrons and you'll get back your erg. Or you can do a beta decay plus, which means taking your neutrons and then getting more protons, or sorry, taking protons and getting more neutrons, or beta decay minus, which is taking neutrons and getting protons instead. So the beta decay reactions, they have like a increasing fee. So based on the volume of your transactions in the past. So in the instantiation on Ergo, which you can try now on Gluon.gold, it tracks the volume of the past 14 days. So if there's a lot of if a lot of people want to sell their protons to get more neutrons, so then stable coins, then if you want to do that again, like if it'll cost you more depending on the amount of volume in the past 14 days. And the same thing for going from the stable coin to the more volatile token.
Yeah, and I guess to make it simple for maybe some people listening, I guess the way JED works and the way SIG-USD works is you end up with the stablecoin asset itself, and then you end up with some form of reserve asset, right? So in the case of the SIG-USD side, you get SIG-RSV, and on the JED protocol, you get a token called Shen, the Shen token, right? So what you're explaining is somewhat similar, I guess, in a way that you have the 2 different assets. Obviously, they represent different things, but you have I guess in the case of Gluon Gold, you've got the gold token itself, right, which is pegged to the, an oracle with the
Yeah.
price of gold, and then you get that other asset as well that you end up with, which is that volatile asset that you were talking about. But I always found it very interesting, given that it was inspired by these physics concepts, which is very different to the, I guess, traditional ways of algorithmic stablecoins we've seen before. And I guess it gets overlooked quite a lot as well, just because there's been such a strong focus around algorithmic stablecoin designs on the Ergo and Cardano side. Many community members have been after reserve-backed stablecoins, which I think is a very uh, sort of relevant demand, and sort of makes sense given what we saw with Luna and some of the issues there that we've seen with other algorithmic stablecoins in the past. And I saw Pyro in the comments, who was obviously working quite closely with the USDM team, who have been doing an excellent job providing reserve-backed stablecoins on Cardano. But what makes Gluon different this time to, I guess, some of the issues that we saw with, these huge spirals in the past?
Yeah, sorry. So I just wanted to touch about the nuclear reactions. So when Bruno was like thinking about this protocol, he just realized that like these operations he wanted to like be part of the protocol, they reminded him of like nuclear, like the basic like nuclear reactions. That's where like he got the inspiration for that. And then in his video, he made a video, I think, like a few years ago for Ergo Summit, I think 2 years ago, where he explains like at a high level the protocol. And what's like another cool part is like this is more like mathy, is it's like he shows that it's the dual of a liquidity pool. So basically you can think of the operations that you can do on a liquidity pool. The Gluon protocol is like kind of the sort of reverse image of that. And it's like this cool math thing. And so it's in a sense, well, the JED protocol that was implemented on Ergo, like even through all of that like Luna stuff, like it still has maintained its peg, which is really cool. And so we can so this is like proof that if algorithmic stablecoins are like designed properly, they actually like can function very well, and like stand the test of time, right? And so because Gluon has just like launched, I think like last month, so we have to wait and see, but it seems to be doing really well so far.
Yeah, and one of the things I wanted to actually talk about, which you and I have obviously talked extensively offline about, is I guess the implications of having a very solid stablecoin design for other types of assets, right? So obviously on the ZenGate side and the Palmyra side, we're very much focused on right now soft commodities. We're looking into metals as well, but these are real world assets where we're dealing in the physical form, right? Like we're spending time on the ground with producers, with farmers, with miners, who are dealing with the actual creation process of these assets, and that's our specialty, and that's what we're focused on. But when we're talking about stablecoin designs like Gluon, like Dexy Gold, which is the other variation of a new stablecoin primitive built by Alex Cherpanoy, and also Jed, which is obviously around already, is that you introduce a new design for creating synthetic assets. And we've seen some of that stuff be popularized in the crypto space, right? So we've seen synthetics being built by several projects on the Cardano side already. Some I can think of already, like Indigo. I think Butane's working on it as well. But they typically use a system called like a collateralized debt position, CDPs, to create these assets. And I guess what you're working on with Gluon is very different. But the implications that I see, which gets very exciting, is for a project like ours, like we have limited bandwidth when it comes to which regions we want to focus on, right? So we may want to focus on Latin America and some parts of Africa and specific commodities, which makes sense for us. But having the ability to mint synthetic assets means you have a whole sort of long tail of assets that maybe people weren't trading before, right? These could be different variation of oils, it could be different stones or different types of metal products, uranium products, where if you have a price feed, you can actually bring these opportunities on chain. You can trade these assets. You can use it as collateral for DeFi. You can do all sorts of stuff like that. So that was sort of the thing that really clicked for me when you and I were talking about it. Because I think the first question was like, can you do like Gluon oil? Can you bring LNG on chain? To actually provide all of this stuff for potential investors and people that want to actually get exposure to these products, whereby a typical on-chain asset would require you to have it in you'd have to store barrels, or you'd have to store the physical form itself to have it as a reserve-backed asset. So I'm just curious, like, those sort of things sort of on the horizon for Gluon, and what are the opportunities you see there, like in the next 5 to 10 years or so?
Yeah, so like you said, in principle, the Gluon protocol, and same with JED, it's just like the only input you need is like a price that's provided by an oracle. So in the case of Gluon, on Ergo we call it Gluon Gold because it's pegged to gold. But you could, in principle, peg it to anything you want. So like silver or oil, but you just need an oracle to provide you the price of whatever asset it is you want to peg the stablecoin to. So
Excellent.
as long as you got to set up the oracle network for LNG.
Yeah. Any commodities that you're interested in, or assets that you might be interested in, that you sort of see yourself getting exposure to if you brought it on chain?
I think since you did gold, I would also have silver, and then also I think oil would be cool, and then maybe like lithium.
Yeah. Yeah, all sorts of stuff you can bring on. I'm so curious to see what happens in the UTXO space, and what people end up building in the end, because there are lots of other synthetics platforms out there who'll be working on these sort of things. But it'll be interesting to see like which design wins, or which design sort of take the market share in
Right.
that space.
Well, I mean, since it is a stable coin protocol, right? So you want to make sure like the price you're pegging your asset to isn't like this something that's like super volatile, right? And then the token you create, like that's the cool part about it, is like it's a stable coin, so then you can like use it as a currency. It's not just like some like asset to hold.
Yeah, makes sense. So like in theory, if you have like Gluon lithium, for example, you could use that as collateral to borrow money against, in theory, and you can just treat it like any other native asset, I guess, which is the beauty of the extended UTXO system. Hey.
Right. Yeah. And like that's so cool. Like, so traditional stablecoins protocols, like the ones that most people heard of, you're basically like buying like a loan kind of, right? The USD you're getting is a loan, so you're putting up collateral and you're getting like equivalent like USD as a loan kind of. So, but Gluon and Jed don't work that way. There's no, you don't have to put up you're not putting up any collateral. Like you're just you because of it was designed properly, right? The reserves are always greater than the liabilities, so you can always like redeem your stablecoin uh for your Ergo to get it back. Like very important.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I'd love to see Gluon come over on the Cardano side. I think there'd be a lot of interest on that space, and maybe there's some stuff we'll end up sort of collaborating on. I know Dan's very fond of the work Bruno does as well. I'm sort of curious to take this to some of the stuff that we've been working on. Luca, you're obviously one of the key architects behind the Winter Protocol. Do you want to let people know what that is? And what is the Winter Protocol? How does it work? And why are we working on it? Maybe is a good place to start.
Oh yeah, sure. So uh yeah, so why? Um, mm, basically we want to do supply chain traceability. We want to be able, so within us, like some supply chain processing steps from like the raw materials to a product, there's like a bunch of steps in between, and you want to be able to record like what happens at each step. And so you can do this with there's a standard called EPCIS, and this just uses like a traditional like database. You store these events on your like a database, and they can be like accessed by like other people to know like what event happened when, and so on. And when we were starting off with the Winter Protocol development, we did a bit of research and we saw that people were trying to use blockchains as well. But like some people were like creating their own blockchain to just to record like the traceability data, which doesn't like maybe not the best thing, since we can just like use Ergo, right? Or maybe even in the future like our own Sigma chain, which would be cool. But basically, instead of storing the data in like a traditional database, we just store it on the blockchain instead. Or more specifically, in our case, we're storing the metadata on IPFS and then referencing it with a token on Ergo. Just due to the constraints of the block size limit, because our metadata is greater than 4 kilobytes. But the way we've designed it, you can get a supply chain or supply like graph technically so given one event, you could then go all the way back in the history to see like where it came from. But since an event could have multiple items, right? Those items come from their own events. It's not just like a straightforward linear chain. It's like it really is like a kind of a graph.
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense. And yeah, for those listening, EPCIS is a global standard, and it's an industry standard that everyone uses. And yeah, like if you really think about it, like all of the items that we're buying in supermarkets, the parts in cars, the jewelry that you buy, all of these things pass through different hands across the supply chain. And the big thing that we've been really focused on from a compliance point of view is there's a lot of new regulations coming in place that's requiring a lot more visibility into supply chains. And we've also seen customers and consumers as well asking for a lot of this stuff. So it's at a really pivotal time. I know like blockchain traceability was a big buzzword a number of years ago when it was being popularized, and when it was when lots of proof of concepts were being run by big companies and shipping companies and whatnot. And it's really fallen off the radar, I think, the last couple of years. But the bit that I'm actually most curious about, Luca, is like why does like event tracking, you know, building a traceability system on a UTXO framework actually make more sense than you know, maybe using Ethereum or like some other EVM chains that has been used in the past for various proof of concepts?
Sure. So, well, I think, well, the main advantage of UTXO is that it's like, well, what I like about it is it's deterministic. So, like, you have to build the transaction ahead of time, and then it won't even let you submit it to the blockchain unless like the transaction is like valid, right?
Mhm.
And that's why this is, and I guess in some sense this is like a useful property to have in supply chain traceability, because if you're like recording an event, you don't want your transaction to just fail randomly for whatever reason.
Mhm.
You want to make sure that it actually like, if you're creating it properly, it should get submitted on the blockchain when you want it to. And what's also nice about UTXO is like Ergo and Cardano, the tokens are like native assets. So they're not like, the token isn't a smart contract. So, and so this helps us for the NFTs that we use as identifiers for the events. And then also the fact that UTXO has to do with like inputs and outputs. So the transaction can have multiple outputs. And this is also useful for our case. Yeah, so those would be the main advantages, I would say, for using UTXO over that account model uh, for our use case.
Yeah, and I guess the other extension to maybe think about as well is because of the fact that these representations of the real world asset is done through a singleton or through a token itself. I guess what's interesting off the back is similar to that conversation we're having with Gluon, is that these are native assets at the end of the day, right? Which means you can use these assets in the broader DeFi ecosystem, right? Whether that's for lending, for insurance, all sorts of stuff like that. Linking it to DIDs and to credentials. I'm curious, like how does that how does all of that sort of map together with each other in terms of those components, and where you see this sort of developing into in the future?
That's a big question. So, like, so for example, like with DIDs. So the cool thing with DIDs is uh, you can like integrate that in the contracts that we have for Winter Protocol, so that let's say someone, well, you could have a verifiable credential to say, okay, only this person can like create an event. So maybe somewhere like in your factory, like you only want certified people who are allowed to create events, like submit events on the blockchain. But then also, let's say you wanted to like transfer ownership of an asset, uh, or like the token representing the event. Like the token represents the token is just an identifier, right? So it represents like an item in the metadata, but you want to represent like this transfer of ownership. So you can like use this for that as well, I guess, in a way, just to say, okay, there's only this person can get this asset and you can like encode that in the contract as well. Or um, like in a similar way, like even though EVM, you can have the tokens are contracts, you can kind of do a similar thing where even though the tokens on UTX on Ergo are like native assets, you can like lock them in a contract, and the contract says only the person with this uh, public key or did can like spend it, like and yeah, so there's like a lot of flexibility you can have.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And the great thing about I guess some of the ecosystems we're building in on the UTXO side is many of these components have been built, right? Like we've spent some time looking into Atala Prism. On the Nervos side, which is also a UTXO chain, they have quite a comprehensive DID solution called D.ID, um, who I think, yeah, one of the best sort of DID solutions out there in the market. The other the bit I want to sort of open up for a conversation now is the Winter Protocol was designed in quite an agnostic way, which ultimately means that we can it ultimately means that we can deal with many different types of use cases. In our case, it's different commodities in different markets with different regulatory requirements, with different types of processing, all of that sort of stuff. But when you really think about it, in sort of a agnostic way, there's lots of other markets that could probably leverage this type of technology. And some of the ones that excite me the most, I remember when we were first starting the business, Nico, one of our co-founders, mentioned, have we looked into the blood market, right? So our entity is actually based out of Ireland, and funny enough, Ireland actually has the highest import exports, at least it was a few years back. I'm not sure about the numbers today, of blood. And blood is obviously a really important, you wouldn't call it a commodity, but it's a really important, I don't even know what you would call it. Blood's important, right? It saves lives. People donate it. You need to know actually specs about the blood before you give it to a patient. Like something like the Winter Protocol, I think has quite an interesting use case for hospitals and the medical industry, for something like that. The other bit as well, one of our early investors is in the aerospace industry. And I remember when we were first speaking to him, he was talking about parts and the need to verify the legitimacy of parts that you use, for airplanes, right? And in many cases, you know, when an airplane's stranded on a field, waiting for repair, costs a lot of money to not only source it, but to check and make sure it's the right part, it works, it's been inspected. Because if you do things wrong in that industry, people die, right? In our case, it's people get fined, or people can get sick, right? Especially with some of the food compliance stuff that we work on. But in other industries, like in aerospace, in hospital, wrong mistakes mean patients die or customers die and or get severely injured. But yeah, I guess the other one that I thought of, which I thought was a really interesting use case, was around procurement, right? Or disbursement of funds, like especially with development institutions or NGOs, you could use the Winter Protocol to basically track, like let's say you need to buy bulk grains and deliver it to some country in need, because there's a refugee crisis or there was a tsunami or an earthquake, making sure you can actually see where the funds came from, how they were deployed, and where it ended up. But I'm curious, like Luca, like have you thought of different use cases that maybe people could use and build on top of the Winter Protocol, given it's open source, and other developers can basically go and leverage the work that we've done in terms of building this out?
Yeah, I mean that's like you said, it's kind of it is since it is inspired by EPCIS, like the events system, it is like generic enough you can apply to like different use cases. So yeah, I think like food is a good one. Like you said, I guess like parts in the manufacturing could be cool too. Like the aerospace one is a good idea. For things like blood, I think so. EPCS, that standard is like broken up by industry. So I think like for pharmaceuticals it's like a bit different. So it'd be cool to like kind of create a, like we can look at that and then create like kind of separate version just for that. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I haven't like I'm not sure exactly like what, like there's so many things it could be used for. Maybe even like uh like a consumer electronics, that could be cool too. Like knowing that, like let's say your phone, like if you open it up and you can see like where each part comes from. Yeah, or yeah. Sorry.
No, I think it makes sense. Yeah, the one that's really been on my mind recently has been around proving social impact as well. And I won't go into details in terms of some of the stuff we're working on, but yeah, I guess there's many businesses out there and many industries that have been fraught with compliance problems and the concerns around human slavery and child labor and mismanagement of staff, like all sorts of stuff like that, pollutants. I think being able to track that stuff in a transparent way. Obviously, you have to get buy-in from the right people and the government and the stakeholders in those industries in order to actually get that over the line. But in the case that they did get aligned, there's a lot of really good stuff you can showcase from a visibility point of view, which extends beyond just, you know, the typical sort of stuff around it was grown in this plot of land and then it was trucked and transferred to this factory and it was processed in this factory, and then, you know, a few stages later it ends up on the shelves of the supermarket. So I think there's a lot of interesting, I guess, social impact reporting that you can do off the back of that as well, which I think will give many businesses an edge at the end of the day. But yeah, lots of sort of use cases, I think, which is really exciting that, you know, we're not currently exploring. So those that are listening that want to work on these types of problems, feel free to ping Luca or I, and we're more than happy to sort of divulge and sort of share some of the thoughts we have. But yeah, those, I think aerospace and blood were sort of the key ones that were on my mind that I'm not sure we'll ever get to work on. Maybe one day, but definitely not right now. I guess the final question, Luca, I'm curious to ask you is, you've actually worked on a whole myriad of infrastructure and dApp development in the UTXO space, right? You've worked on DeGenFi, you've worked on infrastructure for miners, for swapping tokens, you've worked on multi-sig solutions, you've worked on traceability solutions, launch pads, like quite an extensive range across the existing ecosystem that we have. My question for you to wrap things up is, like, where do you see are the big opportunities around UTXO development that maybe from a project point of view people aren't really capitalizing on as much? Like, what are the sort of projects, you know, you would like to see as a user or as a developer that you could sort of recommend people look into, mainly not mainly on the bit around the uniqueness of the UTXO model and what it's capable of doing, given the fact that you've been working in this space for a number of years now.
So, well, I mean, I think that's the cool part about like development is, well, so Alexander Chavarna and the team, right? They created this blockchain and the programming language, right? Ergo script, and that's the cool part about any like programming language, I guess, is like you don't know, you can like create whatever you want with it. You don't, people create things you never even imagined, applications you never even imagined. So I think it's like hard to predict exactly like what because people can create whatever they want. That's like the beauty about it. I think since we are in the crypto space, it would be cool to see more like finance applications that aren't just like DeGenFi, I guess, or gambling, like things that actually help people in everyday life. So maybe like insurance protocols in the future, or like something with real estate, I guess, tokenized real estate, maybe make that process better. But yeah, that's the cool. That's also the cool part is I don't know what people will make, and that's like the fun part of being a developer is when people make come up with cool ideas and you get inspired by it.
Yeah, and to leave it on that note, the first project the final project I actually worked on in Deco was actually a parametric insurance protocol. So if I dig it up, I'm sure a few years back I could find the slides I had for that presentation. But it was yeah, insurance was actually the thing that got me into crypto in the first place, because I was exposed to working on a startup where we're trying to automate the claims process, and it's very clunky in the general insurance space and very costly as well. So yeah, I'd love to see stuff like that being worked on, and especially with the customer base that we have on the Palmyra side, I think, you know, it's probably not as far away as we think in terms of some of these applications, more than what, you know, going off on or going sort of on top of what Ergo Lend has been working on and providing other sort of financial applications for people that really need it, who don't have an alternative in the traditional systems. So yeah, any final words, Luca, on your end in terms of what you want to share and some thoughts that you have before we wrap things up?
Uh, um, hmm, uh, well, I would say if anybody's interested in like Ergo development, they should definitely like look into it. I think it's yeah, there's still a lot of things that have to be created. Even all the side projects I work on, they're still not like fully fleshed out. So there's still a lot of opportunity to make cool stuff.
Awesome. Anyway, on that note, thanks to everyone listening in, and Luca, thanks for jumping on as a special guest. And yeah, really loved the conversation and talking a little bit about the projects that you're working on and the uniqueness of the UTXO model. And on our end, we're going to continue building in the UTXO space as we have been. And yeah, for those that are following what we're doing on the Palmyra side, we'll have lots of updates in the coming months as well. So thanks again to everyone, and thanks, Luca, for jumping on tonight.
Thanks.